This is Dr. Brian Armstrong, and then this is the second of what should be 2 lectures on the Renaissance. In the first one, I left off with this idea that with respect to the main period concept of humanism, you might wish to write about how Renaissance music, how a madrigal and how Ariosto's poem work to develop human potential. And you might focus on this in a purely this-worldly sense, like treating these works without respect to their Christian background or their classical background. You might just wonder how they develop human potential. You could also focus on how they show the adaptation of classical thought. And in order to do that, you would need to understand how classical thought is adapted. And that's what Ficino does. And so if we turn to Ariosto's poem, hopefully you can see, or will see in about 5 minutes, if you don't already, how these concepts apply in that sense. Excuse me. I do apologize for the congestion. The main idea, we might say, is this. Ariosto is writing from the perspective of one who believes in Ficino's view of love, according to which love is a process in which males and females are partners working to turn each the other towards God, understood as the source of the good. We don't take things, we take then as a result with courtly love leads us to take the wrong things seriously. Or I should even say the chivalric code. The chivalric code leads us to focus on war, in the case of the duty to the Lord, and to focus on pursuit of, physical possession of the female, in the case of courtly love. So courtly love distorts our relationship to fellow human beings, leading to war and rape. Ariosto has a problem with that. And so what we might think of his text as doing is experimenting with how people who live in accord with the chivalric code actually operate. And so he puts people in situations, and each situation is, as it were, an experiment. And he sees how courtly love or the feudal code leads the people to live, and he looks at their experience. And what we find is that courtly love and the feudal relation, in other words, the chivalric code, constantly leads people to focus more on this world than God. And in this world, it leads them to focus on their desires. Not in a reflective way, but rather it makes them or puts them at the mercy of their desires. Courtly love seems to give free rein to whatever desires or impulses are in the person, what the classical Greeks would have called epithumia, or appetite, the pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain. And if someone operates in this world by giving into this lowest part of the self, that person will not experience this worldly happiness, and they will be led into temptation and will sin and end up in hell like Francesca. And so Ariosto wants to, his poem focuses entirely on this world and our pursuits of success in this world, because he realizes that how we pursue this worldly happiness and success plays some role in whether or not we draw close to or turn away from God. And the key insight might be this, the idea that we can fashion ourselves. If you think of the medieval person did not conceive of him or herself as one who would fashion him or herself. The medieval person would instead receive their sense of who they should be from tradition, from authority, from a king, or from a priest. The Renaissance artist, however, is constantly thinking about whether or not he should accept what he's been taught and told to do and believe, especially with respect to this world. And the Renaissance artist is aware that there are different perspectives that one can take towards this world, and that those perspectives lead towards different results. Excuse me. And so one can say fashion oneself using a courtly love perspective. One can adopt the courtly love perspective and look at life from that perspective, that vantage point. One can also adopt the Platonic love perspective and look at the world from that view. And the world looks different from those two perspectives, and the principles involved in each kind of love lead one to act differently. So one can choose to adopt a perspective, and that perspective will provide a set of values and principles that shapes the choices one makes, that shapes how one leads one's life. And so what Ariosto is doing is testing these perspectives out. Doing this exalts the human. The human does not just depend upon someone else to tell him or her what to do. The human has to actively think for him or herself and make choices. And the human has to step back and think about the principles, the norms, the values that guide him or her as he or she makes choices. This presents a much more psychologically complex portrait of the individual. The individual is aware that there are multiple perspectives on life, and that he or she can adopt multiple perspectives, and that the person might have conflicting perspectives within him or herself, as most of the people, the knights and ladies committed to the chivalric code, find. For instance, the knights give up their duty in order to pursue the lady. The lady, Angelica, uses men to get what she needs. The men think that they're after the lady because she's above them, when really they see her as a prey whom they are hunting, so on and so forth. You also find this in the madrigals. You have an artist who has a complex set of feelings. He maybe finds a poet who has written a set of poems expressing complex feelings. The composer tries to set that poem to music in order to express the psychological complexity of the poem in the texture of the music. And then people in a court, gentlemen and gentlewomen, they need to be able to pick up the sheet music and sing the song and play the instruments and feel a feeling that they might not actually feel, but that they need to adapt, adopt, explore if they're to play the music well. This leads, of course, to new ways of presenting the world in art. Ariosto realizes that the classical epic will not work as such, and the romance will not work as such. And so he creates a new genre, one in which we can see on the surface courtly lovers and feudal knights in action, but it's a romance that's set into an epic context, and this provides a critical distance. In other words, whenever we see anything happening in Ariosto's poem, it's presented to us in such a way that we can attend to the surface, and it seems fun and beautiful and interesting, but there's also elements that make us think about it at a deeper level. And at a deeper level, we look at things from the critical distance of Ariosto himself and see these courtly lovers not as models to be followed, but as perspectives to be critiqued and perhaps rejected. And much of this comes from a fascination with the classical past, with this figure, Ficino. And so I think I have about, 5 more minutes. 2 last things I want to say, one about Ficino and then one about Ariosto's poem. And I might push Ariosto's poem to a 3rd slide. With respect to Ficino, remember Ficino's the scholar who was commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici to translate Plato and teach the Florentine elite Platonic thought. And there are 2 key bits of Platonic thought at which I want to look. One is Plato's Laws. So this is a text that was unknown in the West, certainly in the Christian West, until the Renaissance. It was first translated in 1454. And here we have the idea expressed by an Athenian. Remember, Plato and Socrates were Athenians. The idea that human lives are like that human life is like a journey on sea, and the journey goes well depending upon how well one has designed one's ship. So, this this excerpt from Plato's The Laws has the metaphor of a shipwright who is going to build a ship, and the first thing he does is he lays down her keel. And if you don't know what a keel is, you can just go here. A keel is a structural element that's central to, it's the initial step in the construction of a ship, and it's what gives the ship its foundation or its base. In the case of a life, you might think that it's the principle or foundation that guides how one approaches life and the choices one makes. And so the philosopher does the same thing. The philosopher tries to frame the shapes of our lives according to the modes, the principles, the values of the soul, and lays down the keel of a life by rightly considering by what modes of living we shall best navigate our bark, our ship of life through this voyage of existence. And the idea is you can build your life, fashion yourself on the model of the courtly lover, or you can do it on the model of the platonic lover. The courtly lover is the kind of person described as a man who is, the Athenian says a man ought to be in serious earnest about serious things and not about trifles. The problem with the courtly lover and the chivalric knight is that he is serious about trifles. He is serious about political wars. He is serious about physical possession of the female. However, the object really worthy of all serious and blessed effort is God, right? And the one thing we should take seriously then is God, and the things we should not take seriously are the things of this world. And this noblest of pastimes is one that one takes seriously by playing. And so the Athenian says that people, we might think the chivalric code followers, imagine that serious work should be done for the sake of play. They think that it is for the sake of peace that the serious work of war needs to be conducted. But as a matter of fact, we, it would seem, do not find in war, either as existing or likely to exist, either real play or education worthy of the name, which is what we assert to be in our eyes the most serious thing. So the most serious thing, the thing that one should take most seriously is play. And play here means education. In the context of the Renaissance, this play is the experimental, the experiments, the testing of perspectives and experience that enables one to understand the good more fully. So what one should take serious is this kind of playful experimentation, exploration that helps one to learn the truth. What one should not take seriously is the chivalric code, the pursuit of war and the pursuit of sex. These things that most people take most seriously distort people's relationship to each other and to themselves. Ariosto in his poem engages in serious play. First of all, he treats the so-called serious things of the chivalric code playfully, and that gives him critical distance on them. Second, he takes seriously this aspect of play, this aspect of critique that enables us to educate and develop ourselves. This is one of the key aspects of the Platonic thought that Ficino introduced to Italians. And Ariosto knew this, and he put it to work in his poem. And we'll stop here, and we will have, the third slide, and we'll look at a little bit of the poem for about 10 minutes.